Hello, all, and welcome back to the Global Realignment Podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing the newly revealed interest the Trump administration has taken in Congo's critical minerals. We've been talking a lot about critical minerals lately, haven't we? It is March 9th, 2025, and it is obviously tied to a larger push, as we've been discussing recently, for the Trump administration to diversify U.S. supply chains for critical minerals because of our overdependence right now on China. This is why we've seen discussions lately about rare earths and critical minerals, specifically related to Ukraine, Greenland, and now Congo. And of course, the one major issue with this interest that we have now in Congo, as with Ukraine, is that Congo is embroiled in war right now that's shaping up into a regional war, as Ukraine is embroiled in a war with Russia. And the war has actually taken place, similar to Ukraine, on the eastern side of Congo, and that's where most of the critical minerals that Congo possesses is located, on the eastern part of the country, bordering Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi. So any interests we may pursue in the country will be extraordinarily risky, obviously, and could draw the U.S. And U.S. resources into a conflict that's been raging for decades. And we'll kind of briefly touch on some of that history before we get into the main article. And I think that it's important to recognize, particularly with Rwanda, this regional war that's going on in eastern Congo right now is related to a decades-long conflict. Okay, you have the Congolese military right now fighting against Tutsi rebels that are in the eastern part of Congo, allegedly backed by Rwanda. And I believe there are regular Rwandan troops also that have crossed the border and pushed into the eastern Congo, and we'll get into some of those specifics as well. But in Rwanda particularly, they gained their independence in 1962 from Belgium. And when that happened, you have the two ethnic groups, the Hutu and the Tutsi, and the Hutu is a majority. This is a majority group in the country, and they ended up taking power after independence. And they held power up until essentially 1994, when the Rwandan genocide took place. There was a rebellion that started in 1990 in Rwanda by the Tutsi minority, and it culminated in 1994. The presidential plane shot down, the Hutu presidential planes shot down, the Hutus, slaughtering in a horrible way about 1,000,000 or 800,000 Tutsis, and then being pushed out by the Tutsi rebels that overthrew the Hutu government. The Hutus were pushed. The majority of them were pushed after the genocide in 1994 into the eastern part of Congo, and there was a huge refugee crisis after that. And following this, and again, history is expansive, and we're not going to get into all the granular details there, but it's kind of a rough sketch of the Civil War, and then the genocide, and then the removal of the Hutu population, or a large portion of the Hutu population, and the Hutu military into the eastern part of Congo, where there's also a small Tutsi minority there as well, which is sort of a source of the current issues that we're seeing right now. The DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, also, up in, I think it was in 1996, that before 1996 it was called Zaire, has been invaded 5 times by Rwanda. The first 2 times from 96 to 97, and 1998 to 2003. That's the first and second Congo War. And that engulfed the whole country and the broader region. And it drew in 9 African armies. The following two conflicts, they span from 2006 to 2009 and 2012 to 2013. And in those two conflicts, Rwanda denied involvement. And over the course of these conflicts, the Rwandan government backed various armed groups, including M23. There was a previous iteration of M23 from 2012 to 2013, and M23 is the rebel group right now that's allegedly backed by the Rwandan military that's pushing into Congo. It's taking some of these major cities in eastern Congo. And since January, actually, there's been rapid conquest and occupation of a huge area of the eastern part by M23, and has raised concerns that the principles may be endangered. And again, understand that there are several groups involved in this conflict. I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but you've got Ugandan militias they're pushing in from the northeastern part, pushing into the northeastern part of Congo right now. You have Burundi fighters that are on the border, and so it could potentially, become a larger conflict. And the West has always been reluctant to get involved in any of this, understandably so. Ever since the genocide in 1994, the West has never really had an appetite to get too involved with what, the going-ons over there, right? Which is interesting because right around 1995, we had a tremendous amount of involvement in the conflict in Yugoslavia, which also had attributes of genocide taking place. And we had a heavy involvement. Us and the U.S. and the UN and NATO had a heavy involvement in the situation in Bosnia, Herzegovina, in Serbia, and after when Yugoslavia was breaking up. And again, in the situation in Congo, it's always been, and it is right now, an amalgamation of different factions with different interests, tied to surrounding countries that are basically at war right now. Another reason is Kigali, the Rwandan capital. Another reason why the West is reluctant to get involved is because the Kigali has become an important Western geopolitical partner. And Rwanda provides the U.S. and Europe with competent military forces in Central Asia. In Central Africa, that can counterbalance Russian mercenaries like Wagner. And also historically, the U.S. and UK have been more closely tied to Rwanda. And the French have been more tied to Congo. So historical ties with Rwanda for the U.S. And so, taking the side right now of Congo in this particular set of circumstances has been, I would argue, the U.S. has been reluctant to do it, but they are showing signs that they are taking, they're sanctioning certain individuals on the Rwandan side of this conflict. And so there is a little bit more movement, but I think that there's still a reluctance to get too heavily involved, at least up until this point. And many of these groups or factions that are sponsored by Rwanda also guard investments in the region for private businesses and investors. So over the past 2 months, the M23, together with as many as 10 to 12,000 Rwandan troops, allegedly, Rwanda denies any involvement, of course, and they've overrun an area of eastern Congo that is home to more than 5 million people. In late January, the rebels captured Goma, big city. They've captured it before, and I think it was the 2012 conflict. and that's the largest city in northern Kivu. Less than 3 weeks later, they also seized Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu, as well as a key airport, thereby cutting off Congolese forces from resupply. And it is a difficult situation for the Congolese military to directly deal with, because their capital, Kinshasa, is about 1,000 miles away from that eastern part. So you're talking about a huge distance between, the capital, the nerve center, and the fighting itself. And the Congolese government has put the number of dead so far at 7,000. The M23 claims that it seeks to counter Hutu extremist groups. Their justification that perpetuated the Rwandan genocide and then took refuge in eastern Congo. And like I said earlier, there is a small element of Tutsi that live in the eastern part of Congo. And, since the 1990s, this massive refugee issue has taken place in the eastern part of Congo, where the Hutus that, carried out the genocide have basically moved across the border into the eastern part of Congo. And so what M23 is basically claiming is that this minority, the Tutsi minority, are being harassed by the Hutu, and so there's reason for this kind of intervention or uprising. The Democratic Forces of the Liberation for the Liberation of Rwanda, known by the French acronym FDLR, was founded more than 2 decades ago by Hutu soldiers and militia members who fled to Congo after massacring hundreds of thousands of Tutsis. So it's sort of it's a militia, basically, that's made up of the perpetrators of the genocide that the M23 is claiming to be fighting against. And a few more reasons, potential reasons for the conflict right now that's going on was 2021. In May of 2021, there was a surprise deal between Tshisekedi, who's the president of Congo, and Ugandan President Museveni, that authorized Uganda to move heavy mechanized equipment into northern Congo to clear swaths of equatorial forest and repair roughly 140 miles of road and infrastructure, an infrastructural upgrade that was expected to boost cross-border trade, both legal and illegal, between the two countries, eliminating the need to move goods through Rwanda. So basically, this sort of, infrastructural economic deal between Uganda and Congo that cut out Rwanda. And so that would be one of the reasons there for what we're seeing right now. And also, Rwanda is small, but a small country, but densely populated, in a resource-poor state. And it's acquired a taste for Congo-smuggled minerals. And many think that they're just driven by the interest of the minerals we were talking about earlier in the video. And that could be one reason, but it's not too convincing, because Uganda and Burundi over years have exploited Congo's minerals as well, and that hasn't led to conflict. So that one's not too convincing of a reason. And these minerals include like gold, diamonds, coltan, tin, etc. Another reason, again, we're just kind of going down reasons why this conflict could have exploded the way it has. There's always many different reasons when you're talking about these conflicts in Africa, why situations like this explode the way they do. Many conflicting reasons that people still study, even when it comes down to the rebellion in the early 1990s that led up to the genocide. So could be that the Rwandan president, who also led the rebellion, the Tutsi rebellion in the 90s, President Paul Kagame, was upset that Burundi, Congo, and Uganda's leaders had bypassed Rwanda in a series of road and rail transport projects. So while it is difficult to parse the interests, its sights have long been on the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. It considers this area to be part of its sphere of interest, not too different from Pakistan's views on Afghanistan, or Israelis' actions in southern Lebanon, or of course the elephant in the room, the situation with Ukraine and Russia presently right now. One of the justifications for the invasion of Ukraine was to protect the Russian-speaking minority in the Donbass. And so, 30 years on, a lot of this stuff in Congo, in Rwanda, is still driven by the memory of the genocide, and it remains a foundational bedrock in Rwandan politics. The establishment there in Rwanda has adopted a maximalist approach regarding security threats, swinging with sledgehammers at flies. Sounds like Israel when you think about Israel's history with certain conflicts. Like they're swinging a sledgehammer right now, in Gaza. The M23 advance since late December is already the gravest escalation in more than a decade of the long-running conflict in the region. A lot of the resources that we're talking about that they're potentially fighting over are tied up in the tech industry. It's a big push right now to accelerate the AI and tech advancements that have started over the course of the past decade. And there are more than 450 mining companies in South Kivu right now, in the eastern part of Congo, mostly run by Chinese nationals. But unfortunately, they are allegedly operating illegally due to a lack of compliance with current Congolese mining codes. So you have, an interest right now by the U.S. in mining in Congo. The Chinese are already there. You also have Israeli interests in Congo when it comes to these critical resources, and allegedly, Mossad interests. There's a story here that I just want to run through before we get to the main story of one of those interests, and I'll just run through this pretty quickly. But it's about an Israeli called his name is Gertler. So we'll just jump right into this. One of Israel's richest men does his business from a discreet floor in the Israel Diamond Exchange and lives in a nondescript villa in one of Tel Aviv's drabber suburbs. At home, he has been little known to the public, but across Africa, his name has long resounded controversially, especially in Congo. Dan Gertler, aged 48, the scion of a diamond trading family, began doing business there in the 1990s and has since bought lucrative mining concessions, partly due to his closeness to Laurent and Joseph Kabila, father and son, who presided over the country one after another from 1997 until 3 years ago. And this was in 2022. Mr. Gertler's interests in Congo have included diamond, copper, and cobalt concessions, some of which he sold on to Glencore, one of the world's biggest commodities traders. He has long been controversial. In 2017, the American Treasury sanctioned him under the Maginski, I might be saying that wrong, it's early, Act, where the assets of alleged human rights offenders or corrupt operators can be frozen. It said Mr. Gertler had amassed his fortunes through hundreds of millions of dollars worth of opaque and corrupt mining and oil deals in Congo, and of using his close friendship with Congolese President Joseph Kabila to act as a middleman for mining asset sales. What has finally drawn the attention of Israelis to Mr. Gertler is recent reports by Israeli public broadcaster and Haaretz that he was helped out by some of the most powerful men serving Israel's previous government under Netanyahu. And again, this was 2022. Netanyahu's back in power, obviously. It has transpired that one of them, Yossi Cohen, then the director of Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence agency, went 3 times to Congo in 2019 to intercede on Mr. Gertler's behalf with President Joseph Kabila and his successor, Felix uh, Tshisekedi. Tshisekedi. Mr. Gertler has strenuously denied any wrongdoing, stressing that he has never been charged in any court anywhere around the world. Mr. Gertler was aided by another senior Israeli, Ron Dermer, then the ambassador of America, who has cited relationships in the region that are important to Israel's interests as a reason for trying to get Mr. Gertler off America's sanctions list. Mr. Dermer and Cohen were among Mr. Netanyahu's most trusted aides, often undertaking secret missions for his government. Mr. Netanyahu even spoke of them as his possible successors. Coincidentally, Netanyahu is facing an array of corruption charges as the same lawyer as Mr. Gertler. And then it just highlighted this portion of the article here. Just before Trump left the White House, he issued an order to let Mr. Gertler operate under a special license while on the sanctions list. But President Joe Biden promptly put him back in the doghouse. So interesting Israeli connection as well. So you have Chinese nationals and firms that are interested in Congo. You have Dan Gertler, the Israeli government, who have taken interests with the support of Trump, apparently, in these mining concessions as well. So just kind of point out the different hands that are working in Congo right now, and probably help us to better understand, some of the motives right now for U.S. interests in Congo as well. Our interests could certainly dovetail with someone like Mr. Gertler's interests or the Israeli government's interests. And so this is just, I'm going to run through this article. It's from the Financial Times, and it discusses, again, the Trump administration's recent interests in, getting involved with mining in Congo. Again, very risky, but article says, quote, the U.S. is in exploratory discussions with the DRC about a possible deal giving it access to critical minerals in the African country, the latest in a series of efforts by the Trump administration to secure access to the resources overseas. Congo, which has vast supplies of copper, cobalt, and uranium, approached the U.S. last month. This is after the conflict started, so you can probably understand why they're probably looking at developments in Ukraine right now and saying to themselves, hey, if Trump is willing to work with the Ukrainians in order to end this conflict, perhaps Tshisekedi is saying maybe he'll work with us. And because I'm in a precarious situation as president of Congo right now because of this invasion, we have something we can give them if they help keep our country stable, essentially. Congolese officials hope a minerals deal will shore up support for Tshisekedi as he struggles with armed conflict in the eastern part of the country. The discussions with Washington have grown more serious in recent days, according to people with direct knowledge of the discussions. The DRC is endowed with a significant share of the world's critical minerals required for advanced technologies. The U.S. is open to discussing partnerships in this sector that are aligned with the Trump administration's America First agenda, the State Department spokesman told the Financial Times. And again, these are great ideas, but I'm not too optimistic that they'll come to fruition at any time in the future, right? Just because of how conflicted this particular region of Africa is. I don't know what firms or individual investors would think this would be a safe bet, unless you're like Dan Gertler and you've been there for a long time and you kind of know the lay of the land and you've worked with, the Kabilas and Tshisekedi in the past. And so this, again, might be partially paving the way for Gertler and the Israeli government to get back into the mix in the mining industry there, especially if some of the Mr. Gertler's interests, partner with U.S. interests. Partnerships with U.S. companies will strengthen both U.S. and DRC economies, create higher skill jobs, and integrate the company into regional and global value chains. And this stuff has kind of been tried before. Again, individual investors, and then China has done it. Everyone will probably say, well, China is, ripping the country off, et cetera. But it's been tried before to a certain extent, and most of the profit is basically sat with the investors and the firms, and of course the various governing bodies of Congo. Most of the wealth and the prosperity hasn't trickled down to the population, of course. Um, Article continues, while the terms of a deal have yet to be worked out, the interest shown by the U.S. underscores the Trump administration's focus on acquiring access to resources around the world, and greater U.S. involvement in Congo will provide a counterweight to China's influence. Another big part of this. It's not just the rare earths, but China's power projection in Africa, which is something that we've been wanting to, Europe and the U.S. has been wanting to, push away from Africa, along with, Russian power projection there, particularly in Sudan. That's it. We'll do a video on Sudan another time, but a letter was sent to Rubio from the DRC. It says, while China has historically dominated mineral supply chains in Congo, the recent policy shift from President Tshisekedi presents a rare opportunity for the U.S. to establish a direct and ethical supply chain. That's keywords there, and a direct and ethical supply chain. Because anything the Chinese are doing over there will automatically be assumed to be unethical and, taking advantage of the population, etc. No major American mining companies have operated in Congo since Freeport McMoran sold its stake, the Tenke Fungurumi copper mine in 2016. Mineral deal talks are taking place at a time when the political situation in the country is increasingly fragile. Tshisekedi's hold on power has looked shakier in recent weeks as his political opponents in Congo seek to take advantage from his perceived weakness. So there's that. And, the Trump administration is moving so fast right now with many of its initiatives. And I remember doing my first video on the interest that when Trump started to talk about his interest in Ukraine's precious resources, their rare earths. Now, of course, like I said before, Zelensky, Ukraine's president, was already talking about that last year, about basically some kind of trade security for rare earth resources in his victory plan that he wrote up last year. And Trump, decided to try to take advantage of that, and we saw the result. But I think that it'll be very interesting to see how it shakes out. But when discussions like this are happening behind the scenes, as it did with Ukraine, it isn't long before, it starts breaking into the mainstream news, and we'll probably start hearing more about Congo and the war, and probably the history and how wicked and evil the Rwandan government is, and all of these different things. We'll probably start hearing that in the mainstream pretty soon in light of this deal. But I don't know. It's a lot of energy and a lot of political capital to use and to try to draw Americans into, taking interest in this topic and in this kind of initiative. So personally, I think that Trump should just stick with Greenland, try to work with Greenland, because he's wanting to do these things. He's wanting to pursue these initiatives in conflict zones. And while it might look great on paper, it doesn't make much of a damn at all if they're conflict zones and you can't exploit the resources until, decades down the road. Or if, certain people can exploit them and, they enrich themselves, and again, the Congolese government, but the people don't reap any of the benefits. So we'll see what happens, but we'll be keeping our eyes on it. Anyways, I want to thank everybody for joining, whoever joined, and like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.